Hi, hello everybody. Welcome to another session of one question a day. And the tooth morphology question that we are going to discuss is the morphology dimensions of maxillary permanent first molar with relevant diagrams. This is a very important question. The maxillary first molar and mandibular first molars are very oftenly repeatedly asked in the university exams. It may be any university that you follow or you are a student of, but this question is fascinated many of the examiners. And it is very easy to score because it's nearly confirmed. Every other exam has this question. And as usual, as outlined in the session, tooth morphology answering Q, the introduction has to be like this. The molars are the rearmost and the most complicated tooth, sixth most tooth in the midline in the maxillary quadrant. It has a mesial contact with the second deciduous molar till the root exfoliates, and it is then shared by the second premolar when it erupts at the age of about 12 years. There is no distal contact until the permanent second molar erupts sometime around the age of 12. As the permanent molars do not replace any other deciduous teeth, they are not succinadious teeth. Okay, they are the largest tooth in the maxillary and has one of the largest crown. In fact, the largest crown in the mouth. It is complex and it is the least variable in anatomic form. And it is wider buccolingually than mesiodistally. Wider buccolingually than mesiodistally. Shorter occlusogingivally than the maxillary premolars. All four vertical surfaces, crown surfaces, exhibit a trapezoidal outline, a very characteristic features from all the four aspects, mesial, distal, buccal, lingual. The outline is more or less trapezoidal, whereas the occlusal aspect is also four-sided rhomboidal configuration with a twist. So we will deal with that when it comes. It has three roots, two buccally located, mesio-buccal and disto-buccal, and one lingually or palatal roots. That has to be maintained. Its importance is for grinding of the tooth. Plays a vital role in mastication of food, and about loss of one maxillary molar, this molar, could compensate or reduce the food chewing capacity by at least 20% on side. They are very vital in maintaining the vertical dimension of the face. Loss of tooth, early loss of tooth will affect the aesthetics also in that way. Okay, so the tooth notation, how it is named under the universal, the right side it is called as 3, left side it is 14. International FDI it is 1/6 and 2/6. Palmar notation 6 and this 6. Chronology, the first evidence of calcification is at birth, around the age of birth. Enamel by 3 to 4 years, the enamel completion occurs and eruption occurs at 6 to 7 years, and root completion of this first molar, maxillary first molar, takes up to 9 to 10 years. Then you follow the list of recommended dimension that is suggested. In going into the buccal aspect, the general shape of the tooth is trapezoidal with the longest parallel side at the occlusal surface. Longest of the parallel side at the occlusal and the shortest is at the cervical line. The buccal surface is much larger than that of the premolars, though the occlusogingival dimension is less. Because of the rhomboidal or trapezoidal crown form, a portion of the distal surface may be visible from the aspect because it is twisted, we said. Okay, except distolingual, all other cusp tips may be weighted. Going to the mesial outline is flat from the cervical margin occlusally to the contact area, flat, which is the height of contour and is located at the junction of the occlusal and the middle third. Occlusally from the contact area, the mesial margin is convex and joins the occlusal margin in a slightly rounded, well-defined mesiolingual or mesio-occlusal angle. The distal outline is convex occlusogingivally with the height of contour associated with the contact area in the middle third. The disto-occlusal angle is more rounded than the occlusal, mesio-occlusal angle. The cervical line is slightly and irregular, curved apically, but not semilunar in shape. There may be a sharp dip or point in this margin, just occlusal to the furcation area. Center, there may be a dip. The occlusal outline is divided into two parts by the concavity of the buccal groove into mesial and distobuccal cusp. The outline of the mesiobuccal cusp is wider, but the distobuccal cusp tip is very sharper. The two buccal cusps are approximately the same height and the mesiolingual cusp tip is visible between them. This is the most important point. So, crown trapezoid, 4 major cusps divide symmetrically, 4 ground between the cusps, sometimes end in a pit. Next, the root is, we see the mesiobuccal root, distobuccal root, both are cone shaped. The mesiobuccal is inclined distally, whereas the distal is inclined mesially. Very classic description you have to give about the root outline. Then coming to the palatal aspect. The palatal aspect is about as wide as the mesiodistal as the buccal surface and is also trapezoidal in shape. The lingual surface or palatal surface shows some general convexity occlusogingivally than the buccal surface. Mesial outline is very similar to that of the buccal aspect, flat then convex. Distal margin is similar to the buccal aspect except that it is very short, and occlusal angle is more rounded since the distolingual cusp or distopalatal cusp is much smaller than the distobuccal cusp. Cervical line follows the same convexity, slightly flattened or dipping. Occlusally, as on the buccal surface, a groove, distolingual groove, separates the occlusal margin into two unequal parts. In the buccal aspect, it is two equal parts. Here, unequal parts. The mesiolingual outline, cusp outline is much longer and larger, but blunter than the sharp distolingual outline. The mesiolingual cusp is normally the largest and the longest cusp in the tooth. Reiterate, mesiolingual cusp is normally the largest and longest cusp. The distolingual groove originates on the occlusal surface, crosses onto the lingual surface, distal to the midpoint of occlusal outline. It may end in a lingual pit and may be caries prone. And here there may be a accessory cusp that is called as the cusp of Carabelli. Cusp of Carabelli, arising from the lingual portion of the mesiolingual cusp, is a tubercle or a mini cusp known as the cusp of Carabelli, the fifth cusp. Not always, but seen in some cases. Hence, called to be a deviation. Not abnormality, deviation. Then, repeating again the same fifth cusp called the present on the mesiolingual cusp. Root, palatal root, only single palatal root, conical in shape, but other two roots are also seen. The distal and the distobuccal and the mesiobuccal shape also seen. Next, we go into the root, mesiobuccal, palatal roots, in the same thing. Now, going to the mesial aspect, the mesial surface exhibits a roughly trapezoidal shape with two roots, broad buccal, mesiobuccal root and a palatal root. The buccal margin beginning at the cervical line, the buccal outline is convex till the cervical third, especially if there is a prominent bucco-gingival groove. Then it is flat to slightly concave for a short distance in the middle third. Then the outline is straight or slightly convex. Lingual margin is convex throughout the outline and may be irregular by the presence of cusp of Carabelli. Cervical margin is slow and flattening out. Occlusal margins are visible with mesiobuccal cusp and mesiolingual cusp. Mesiocontactile area is seen and the root trunk is approximately 3 to 5 millimeters seen, and the bifurcation is seen. In the occlusal, you see the prominent mesial marginal ridge and the marginal groove running across the same. The contact area is round to ovoid and situated to the buccal at the junction of the occlusal and the middle third. The occlusal half of the surface is convex, but a buccolingual flattening is also seen. Distal aspect is more or less the mesial surface, but less dimension, less pronounced. Okay, the occlusal thing you see your distolingual and distobuccal cusp. Otherwise, it is the same. From the occlusal, this is the most complex. The general form from the occlusal aspect, this tooth has a novel rhomboidal form, a square-shaped form with 4 equal sides, but not 90 degrees. This shape creates mesiobuccal and distolingual line angles which are acute and which are acute less than 90 degree, whereas you create an obtuse line angle in others. the acute or mesiobuccal and distolingual. Mesiolingual and distobuccal are obtuse. The outline is wider buccolingually than distally. The mesial and distal outlines are marked by or crossed by the mesial and distal marginal grooves, and they divide the tooth into two equal halves. The buccal margin, the facial outline or buccal outline is divided into two parts by the buccal groove, and the mesial portion is longer than the distal portion. The mesial portion is longer than the distal portion, making the distal cusp sharp. The lingual margin is also divided into two convex portions by the distolingual groove. Distolingual groove, and the mesial portion is longer and less concave than the distal portion. Boundaries. The occlusal table is bounded mesially and distal by the mesial marginal ridge and distal marginal ridge. So you talk about the cusp, four cusps: mesiobuccal, distobuccal, mesiolingual, distolingual, and an accessory cusp or a supplementary cusp called as cusp of Caraballi or tubercle of Caraballi. And you have the mesiobuccal cusp, which is the most prominent cusp. It is quite sharp, second largest in size, following the distobuccal cusp. The four cusps which are named according to the direction they extend and described anatomically as the buccal cusp ridge, lingual cusp ridge, and the mesiolingual cusp to form a transverse ridge known as the triangular ridge of the mesiobuccal cusp. Triangular ridge of the mesiobuccal cusp. Then we have the mesial cusp ridge, distal cusp ridge, and the inclined plane. The distobuccal cusp is the sharpest and the third largest of the four major cusps. Mesiolingual cusp is the biggest cusp, but tip is rounded and blunt. They are very similar to other cusps. The transverse ridge in the tooth. We have a transverse ridge, the buccal cusp ridge of the mesiolingual cusp, and the lingual cusp ridge of the mesial cusp to form a transverse ridge. So we have central fossa, distal fossa, mesial triangular fossa, distal triangular fossa. We have the cuspal ridge, triangular ridge, mesial marginal ridge, distal marginal ridge, oblique ridge, and a transverse ridge. A transverse ridge is, again repeat, is the buccal cusp ridge of the mesiolingual cusp, and the lingual cusp ridge of the mesiobuccal cusp form a transverse ridge. The oblique ridge is created by the union of distal cusp ridge of the mesiolingual cusp and the lingual cusp ridge of the distobuccal cusp. The other grooves are the buccal groove, distal oblique groove, central groove, transverse groove, fifth cusp groove, if present, lingual groove. Okay, so we need to draw the diagram which cusp is the biggest. Biggest is the mesiolingual or mesiopalatal cusp, followed by mesiobuccal, distobuccal, and smallest is the distolingual. You draw all the fossas and groove clearly. So you need to have at least 3 occlusal diagrams. Then we have the fossas, central fossa, distal fossa, mesial triangular fossa, and distal triangular fossa. The pits are the central pit marked by mesial pit, marked and distal pit, central pit, mesial pit, distal pit. Then we have the groove, buccal groove, central groove, mesiobuccal triangular groove, mesiolingual triangular groove, mesial marginal triangle groove, and distolingual groove. So all the grooves you have to clearly mention. You talk about the root morphology, root trunk, lingual root, buccal root, and talk briefly about the root trunk also. Then the pulpons is 5, 3 buccal, 2 lingual or palatal. Then we have talked about the contact points for the tooth, and with that we come to the end of the discussion on the maxillary permanent first molar, which is a very important essay questions. You cannot afford to miss. Learn it by heart using the keys that has been provided as well as using your textbooks. The supplement for the maxillary first molar, like others, we are not concentrating on the occlusal diagram that has been discussed earlier, but we are discussing on the again on the mesial, palatal, buccal, palatal, mesial, and distal surfaces. For the maxillary permanent first molar, the buccal surface shows 2 prominent cusps and 3 roots. All 3 roots are visible from the buccal surface. Let us go from the cervical line. The cervical line is nearly flat, and towards the mesial surface, it forms a straight outline till the junction of the occlusal and middle third, where there is a contact area, and it is forming the mesiobuccal cusp, which has a long mesial slope and a short distal slope, then continues to form the distobuccal cusp. The distobuccal cusp has the mesial marginal ridge and the distal marginal ridge of the distobuccal cusp meeting at 90 degree, whereas this mesial and distal marginal ridge of the mesiobuccal cusp meets at an obtuse angle. Then here along the distal surface, it is uniformly convex till the contact area, after which it is nearly straight or mildly convex. The cervical line, as we said, is flat. So we have a straight outline till contact area and the mesial surface, after which it's a convex surface, short and long mesial, short distal, long mesial arm for the wide mesiobuccal cusp, which meets at a obtuse angle. Then we have the distobuccal cusp. The mesial and marginal ridge of this cusp meets at 90 degree, then uniformly convex till the cervical end, then a flattened cervical line. We have three roots. All the three roots are visible. The mesial surface of the mesiobuccal root is inclined distally at the apical third, and the entire mesial surface is first towards the apex, it is convex, whereas in the middle and the cervical third, it is concave. It is concave, convex. There is a inclined distally at the apical third. The distobuccal root is narrow, has a concave outline, mesial outline, and towards the apical third, it is convex. The palatal root is also visible, and it's largest of all the root. So this is your buccal surface all in one. The furcation is about 3 to 4 mm from the center. There is a slight, maybe a slight cervical dip in some cases. From the palatal aspect, we see two cusps again and parts of the root. The cervical line is flat with a small cervical slight dips. Then we have the distolingual cusp and the largest cusp of them all, that is the mesolingual cusp. Going from the mesial surface, it is a straight line till the contact area. Then we form the mesiolingual cusp, which is entirely convex in its outline. Then we have the distolingual cusp, which is the rounded. Then it follows a uniformly convex line till the cervical line. We have a well-developed lingual developmental groove. We have the cusp of caribuli. So to go again from the mesial outline straight, forming the mesiolingual cusp, then convex, distolingual cusp, and uniformly convex. Both the cusps are separated by the lingual developmental groove. Here in the mesial surface, we forgot to mention about the developmental buccal groove that separates the distobuccal from the wide mesiobuccal cusp. Now going on to the mesial surface of the maxillary first molar, we again have two cusps, the mesiobuccal and mesiopalatal. The mesiopalatal cusp is the biggest cusp, and the cuspal ridges meet at 90 degree here. You'll see the cusp of caribuli. The surface outline is uniformly convex till the nearly straight cervical line. Nearly straight cervical line. In the mesiobuccal cusp, the buccal outline is convex with a crest of curvature in the cervical area. Then it is otherwise uniformly convex. You have an area of concavity, a developmental depression, and that is the crown part. The root part, we find the mesiobuccal root, which is broad. The mesial buccal outline is straight till the apical third, where it is convex in nature. The mesial outline is convex, whereas for the palatal root, the mesial outline is concave. The difference, note the difference. The palatal root side from the mesial aspect, for the palatal surface, it is uniformly convex. Here the difference comes in the only the buccal and buccal surface. This difference, convex, concave. The palatal root is narrow and smaller as compared to the mesiobuccal root. The mesiopalatal cusp and the cusp of caribuli. Here going on to the distal surface, most of the is repetition. The entire surface, both the outlines of the palatal and buccal are uniformly convex. We have a large distobuccal cusp and a smaller distopalatal cusp. As compared, the distobuccal cusp is smaller than the mesiobuccal root. Hence, part of the mesiobuccal root is visible. Here, the outline is straight till the last portion where it is convex. Again, here both surfaces are concave. That is the buccal surface or the palatal surface of the palatal root as well as the buccal root, is distobuccal root. Here the outline is nicely convex, then follows a straight pattern with a hook-like structure. That is our buccal, right, palatal, mesial and distal surface for your maxillary permanent first molar. Right, draw and practice the diagrams. Diagrams are the key to score marks. So for patterns, occlusal, 1, 2 and 3 diagrams, they have to be perfect. That will fetch you more marks. So stay connected till we meet again with another question. Learn incrementally. Happy learning.